So happy that everyone was able to make it today, and absolutely thrilled to have you here for the 11th annual Tailored Leadership Summit. So round of applause for everyone. I love a keynote speaker that can kick off the screaming round of applause. So welcome everyone. So first of all, my name is Dr. Matt Olson. I'm the director of the Tailored Leadership Institute, the world famous, amazing Tailored Leadership Institute. And a little bit about TLI before we get started today. So one of my favorite leadership quotes is, leadership is communicating people's worth and value so clearly that they begin to see it in themselves. And that's by Dr. Stephen Covey. And the leadership work that we do at the Leadership Institute is primarily and solely focused on student development, helping students become a better version of themselves through our experiences, through our classes, our amazing staff, and faculty, with the ultimate goal of helping students succeed both here on campus and in the future in the workplace and throughout the community. So before we begin and talk about our direction for the day, I want to brag about what makes our program, what makes our institute the best, and it starts with our students. Okay, where's Johnny? Is Johnny here? Is he hiding back somewhere? He's probably working, okay? We have one of our students, Johnny, who came to us as a freshman, started taking classes with us, didn't talk. I actually asked a few people if he could talk. And Johnny has gone from person who didn't speak quite often. There he is. Everyone say hi to Johnny. Johnny is now president of the African American Engineering Club. President, by the way. Notice that? Not vice president, not secretary, president. He's being mentored by a leader in his career field and is about to finish his leadership minor. So just an amazing leader. We have folks from the UNF women's golf team. Lisa and Mindy, stand up for a sec. You won't miss them because they came matching. Okay. They will be going through our program, and one of the things that we've noticed, not only do we see gains in students in terms of their academic success, but also extracurricular success. And I'm not saying it is a direct correlation, but a few weeks after doing some leadership training, Lise, hole-in-one, correct? Okay, nice job. Okay, and Mindy qualified for one of the most elite golf tournaments over the summer. So I'm not guaranteeing that it'll improve your golf game, but it will improve every one of the students here that go through this program. So thank you, ladies. So beyond our students, I know I'm biased, but I know that we have the best faculty here. In terms of the courses we take, raise your hand, or actually let's stand up those folks who have taken a course with us. Intro to Leadership, a practicum course. If you've taken a course with us, please stand up. All right, fantastic. Okay, round of applause. And those folks will attest to the quality of our instructors. We have former executive Hollywood producers. We brought on to our staff Dr. Earl Johnson, former NFL player and future superintendent of schools in Flagler County. We have Dr. Andrea Adams Manning, our dean of students, who's taught with us. Just an amazing group. Corinne Stukes, our assistant director for curricular activities. Amazing staff. Even Pam Challey, former provost, is going to be with our teaching team. So Provost Rhodes, the second you retire, we have a spot for you. Just know that. Perfect. Spring 2020. All right, so one of the things that we are also doing with our practicum, before our students leave with the leadership minor, they have the opportunity to be mentored and coached by someone in their career field. It's a brand new initiative, and all of our community members who are here today, can you all raise your hand, community members who are here? We'd love to have all of you serve as a leadership mentor for our students, because what better way to learn about leadership in the real world from someone who's actually doing it? So we're so thrilled about that. Okay, and then in terms of our events, our co-curricular director, okay, Corey Hilliard. Give Corey a round of applause because she helped pull this together. Our events and training are some of the best that students have said they've attended. So everything from, we had the Space Gal from Discovery Channel last year. We had Drew Dudley, TED Talk Drew Dudley was here. We also have trainings, everything from student government training to the library team, even all of UNF athletics is going through it, okay? But before we talk about our amazing guest speaker, let's go through some logistics for today. So our topic for the day is leadership for the future. One of my favorite quotes is, it has a sports analogy, is Wayne Gretzky said, one of the greatest skills I had was the ability to look where the puck was going, not where it's been. So our focus for today is looking at leadership for the future. Before we start, let's have a special round of applause, okay, for all of our student volunteers. How many student volunteers do we have here today that stepped up? Or is it just, okay, they're all in class, good. Students, academics first, nice job, okay? To our local businesses and community partners who are here not only in attendance but also donated some of the amazing swag, we thank you for that. Give them a round of applause for that. And you will notice that at each table, there are table captains. So how this went about is we actually tricked them into being table captains. We told them that they were VIPs and said, you'll get, we'll promise you a signed book by Danielle if you took on this role. And that was a really small font, so they didn't realize it until they actually sat down today. So let's recognize them as well. So thank you very much. So at the middle of each table, you'll see a sign-in sheet. Make sure you sign in. Also, make sure you've seen the photographer out front and tag us on social media at UNF Leader, and you'll be entered to win a prize. Mike, what is our prize for that social media? Lunch with Mike? Is that one of the prizes? Okay. All right. So make sure you sign in. The event program has our agenda for today. There are table guidelines and activities. You will not have to sit through 612 PowerPoint slides like many of my students have to endure in my class. This is going to be interactive, engaging. We ask that you have your cell phone silenced. One of the things that many of my students know, if your cell phone does go off, be prepared to come up and sing your ringtone to the group. So just make sure your phones are off. And if you do need to take a bio break or take time, please be sure to do so at any time because we don't have scheduled breaks, so take advantage of that as well. But just get back because Danielle has some amazing things to say. And also the evaluation form is there as well. So before we get started, let's talk about our amazing speaker today. Dr. Danielle Harlan is the founder and CEO of the Center for Advancing Leadership and Human Potential. Through her consulting, training, speaking, and coaching work, Danielle empowers leaders to develop the competencies they'll need to succeed and generate a lasting positive impact in their local and global economies. Danielle is the author of the book, The New Alpha. Join the rising movement of influencers and change makers who are redefining leadership. She has also been featured in leading publications such as Fast Company, Forbes, Entrepreneur, Inc., and Women's Health. Prior to launching the center, Danielle was the Chief of Operations for the Carnegie Foundation, where she worked to harness the power of networks and quality improvement strategies in order to solve important educational problems. Danielle started her career as a Teach for America Corps member and later served as a mentor and advisor, and actually a mentor now in our program, so thank you, Danielle, for global leadership adventures. She earned her doctorate in political science and a master's in education from Stanford University, where she was a Jacob K. Javits National Fellow and received a Centennial Teaching Award for excellence in instruction. Danielle currently lives with her family in Silicon Valley, California. In her spare time, she can be found hiking, eating her way around the Bay Area, or with her nose in a Harry Potter book.
Yeah, Harry Potter.
We are so lucky to welcome Dr. Danielle Harlan to learn more about the leadership of the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. I see the mic is working. Excellent. Matt, thanks for the wonderful introduction. I want to bring you everywhere, just have you introduce me, because that was fabulous. Don't have much to add to that. I'll just say, as Matt mentioned, my background is as a teacher. I also have a real strong research bent. I try to make sure that the work that we talk about and do in leadership is based in evidence. And as well, I have some real-world leadership experience, so deep empathy for how easy some of the concepts in leadership that we'll talk about, including some of those we'll talk about today, are in theory, but how difficult it can be in practice. So I hope today, as we move through our time together, that you see evidence of all of those perspectives, right? The teaching perspective, thinking about not just what content do I want to share with you, but how can we really grapple with it and interact in a meaningful way that's going to create not just greater knowledge for you about leadership, but actually a greater leadership practice for you going forward. And it will be evidence-based. I'm going to spend a little bit of time up front just making sure that we kind of frame our time together, but really the meat of our session today is going to be you doing experiential and reflective work to really think about your own leadership practice, what you do well, what you know about yourself, and hopefully you'll learn some new things as well and some strategies to increase your leadership capacity. And if all goes well, we will have a short break in there, but also some time for Q&A at the end. I feel like I always say that and then it's really, really short, but we're really gonna try. One final thing I will say, most of you I haven't met before today, super excited to be here and get to know you, and you might be just too polite to ask, like, is Danielle pregnant or did she just eat 100 burritos before? And I will say both are true. And they are related, I would say. So yeah, we're happy to take Q&A about that at the end, if anyone's curious about that. But yes, want to put that out there. All right, so before we get started, I think one of the huge benefits of time like this together is not just the content that you all are going to get, but also the opportunity to really network with other like-minded student community and faculty leaders. So I want to take just a few minutes up front. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about this on your own. I know some of us prefer introversion, a little bit of think time. And I want you to think about your full name, what your preferred pronouns are, like she or her, your year and major, and then something you're grateful for today. Then I will tell you when 30 seconds is up. You're going to discuss in your table groups, table facilitators. I'm going to lean on you to make sure people stick to about 30 seconds per intro. Otherwise, we'll be here all day doing that. So let's get started with think time now. Think about your response. All right, UNF, I love you. I feel like we're 25 seconds in and people are like, we are ready, we are doing it. You have 5 minutes to go around the table. We'll see if we need a little bit more or less. Try and spend about 30 seconds per person on this. Okie dokie. Hopefully at this point, all, if not at least most of you have had time now to introduce yourself. Sometimes people ask, why do you start with an icebreaker? It just feels like this traditional thing we kind of tack on to the beginning of sessions like this. And actually there's a really good evidentiary basis for this. That's what we would say as scientists. There's actually evidence that icebreakers help you, A, connect with the other people at your table, but also kind of start this norm of communication, right? We're all going to be participating and chatting together. And then the gratitude piece, there's a huge body of research that shows in the long run, the number one factor that affects your long-term fulfillment, not just your happiness, but really deep fulfillment as a human being, is the amount of gratitude you feel. So if after completing that, you also are like, oh, I feel kind of good. You're welcome. It's the gratitude part of that. Feel free to use this, honestly, at the beginning of meetings. It's a nice way to really kick things off, get people chatting, and gratitude tends to make people feel good as well. All right, so the teacher and me can't resist. Let's think about what are the outcomes today? Where are we heading, right? In the spirit of the Wayne Gretzky quote, where are we going? A couple of things we're going to hit on today. One is we're going to talk about why modern leadership is broken and what you can do to help fix it. This is going to be the part of the beginning, mostly me sharing some info, getting some feedback from you all. And then we're going to dive into something called personal leadership identity. That term probably seems a little bit jargony. It'll make more sense when we dive into it. You will leave this session knowing very well what it is, and also having a working draft of your own personal leadership identity statement. And then lastly, you're going to identify at least one way that you can contribute to a collective leadership experience. So we'll think about what does that word collective mean in the context of leadership. Any questions about the objectives? All right. Awesome. Agenda, can't resist. We're right now in Leadership for the Future. That is what we're teeing off in this very moment. We're going to then dive into the Personal Leadership Identity Workshop. That's a very reflective type of exercise. We'll have a quick break, and then we will finish up with the Collective Leadership Conversation and Workshop. Couple of just quick logistical notes. I know Matt covered most of them, but yeah, please do get up and use the restroom when you need to. Sometimes people are like, I don't know, can I get up and go? I've seen the restrooms. They are lovely facilities. There are not enough of them for all of us to get up during the break and use them, so go use them as you need them. I know I will. We also only have 2 mics, so there are parts of this session where I will ask you to kind of call out responses. So I would say just be prepared at your table to use what I would say is your theater voice, and speak loudly, because we're trying to make sure that that shows up as well on the video, and then we'll use the mics for some of the longer sort of response pieces. Last thing I will just say is, again, this time together today, we thought really strategically about what do we want to cover and how can we best use this time, and it really is designed to focus on you. So in the beginning, again, it's me teeing up some ideas and doing some framing, but get prepared to work and really dig in, because it is going to be a meaty day for you all. All right, questions about the agenda? Rad. All right, let's dive in. Leadership for the future. Show of hands, how many of you have ever worked for a terrible leader or with a terrible leader? All right, I asked this question around the world. Usually the response is similar. You can just shout out, what's a one-word description that you would use to describe these leaders? Anyone? Disorganized, inflexible, inconsistent, won't listen. One-track mind, sorry, I'm biased a little bit to the middle, so I'm gonna lean to the left. Not honest, yeah. What else? To the right? Micromanager, yeah. What do you mean by that? A little too much like in the how, not like the big picture, where are we going, telling you how to do things. I get that response a lot. That's why I wanted you to dig into that. Yeah, it can feel really disempowering. Yeah, what else? Condescending, yes. What else? Inconsiderate, yeah. What else? Late. Different for different people. I will really try to stay on time as an aside during these sessions. Yeah. Oh, yeah, stick, not carrot, right? Like using kind of force and fear tactics rather than incentives or making people feel excited or compelled about like a great vision that they actually want to pursue. Yeah, great point. All right, so next question on this is, how did you feel when you worked with this kind of leader? Stressed? Anxious? Little, yeah. Unmotivated, big one, yep. Stifled, yeah. What else? Horrible, generally horrible. Anyone else? Angry, love it, yep. Anxious? Uncomfortable, frustrated, yeah. I love this. I always ask this because, as I said in the beginning, I really try to make sure that whatever content we cover is based in research. And there's a huge body of research around who terrible leaders are and sort of the impact that they have. But you don't need to look at the research to know, right? Everything that you all are saying today in terms of how you're describing those leaders and then the impact that it had on you as someone who had to work with them is exactly what the research says. Nevertheless, we are at UNF, an esteemed academic institution. You might run into people who are like, I need to see the research. So I feel compelled to share a few fun facts from the research. So in the US, where we are today, 75% of workers believe that their boss is the most difficult and stressful part of their job. Anyone ever experienced that, a job where your boss was the worst? I see some like nodding and yep, that research makes sense. Also, 85% of workers worldwide are not engaged in their work. I think this is amazing. Just imagine, that's like most of us are at a table of about 9 people. That means maybe 1 or 2 people, if we were all across the world in the real world, maybe 1 or 2 of you would be engaged in your jobs. What's going on with the rest of us? And the last piece of research I'm going to share is that supervisors with that bottom line mentality, right, just focus solely on the profits, this gets back to your point about not having meaning and purpose in the work. When they're focused on profits at the exclusion of things like caring about, employee well-being, environment, ethics, right, being honest, actually often harm the overall performance of the organization because it really turns workers off and they tend to lose respect. So we think oftentimes, leaders like this are terrible to work with, but What are you going to do? Well, actually, they have really bad long-term impact as well in terms of employee well-being, but also how well the organization does. So I want to just say, raise your hand if you've ever experienced any one of these like data points in the real world in your experience. Yep, exactly. All right, so let's dig in a little bit to leadership for the future. And where we're going to start with is the status quo model of leadership, right? These are the leaders we were just describing that the research says are not only not effective, but actually produce in the long run really bad outcomes. As you know, some of you have a copy of my book today, The New Alpha. I call these people the traditional alphas, right? They're the status quo leaders. A couple of things about them. One, they are generally effective at getting the job done. Sometimes they're not. Some of you might have thought like incompetent when you thought of a leader. It is true, sometimes leaders are just plain incompetent, but sometimes they're actually competent and they're still really difficult to work with. They often think the ends justify the means, so whatever we have to do to get to the goal, let's get to it. And they prioritize personal success, me, like where do I want to go, and you all are with me, focusing on goal attainment only. Goal attainment in of itself isn't bad. We want leaders who can help us to achieve goals, but when that's the singular focus, you can really lose sight of other important factors. And they tend to be very individualistic. Again, it's all about me, where am I going, what do I need to do to get you to get that for me? In contrast, leaders for the future have a better model. They tend to be transformational, so thinking about not just where do we want to go, but how do we really transform the context that we're in and the people as well along the way. And how we achieve our ends matters, right? So this gets back to being ethical, that matters. There's actually great research now showing that leaders who are ethical tend to inspire higher levels of creativity and innovation because people trust the environment that they're in because they know it's ethical and they're going to be treated fairly and with honesty. But also, you don't want leaders who, I see this all the time in my work, and maybe some of you have experienced it, and to be honest, I have too, where you're so focused on getting to the end goal that you lose sight of self-care, right? Like you're not getting enough sleep or exercise or eating as well as you should. But leaders for the future really think, that matters. We need to pause and make sure we're taking care of ourselves as well. Their priorities are personal excellence, being the best human beings we can be. And they also want to achieve goals. Again, we don't want leaders who don't achieve goals. They would not be effective. But they think about fulfillment. What does it mean for me as a human being to have the impact that only I can have in the world? What's going to bring me a sense of joy and purpose? And the fulfillment of those around me. And then also they think about lasting impact, not just what's the bottom line that we're driving toward this quarter, but in the long run, what is the difference we want to make in the world? And they're really good at facilitating progress towards a collective and co-owned vision. So it's not just like, all right, y'all, here's where we're going. Who's on board? It's, hey, where are we going together? Let's all make sure that we're shaping this and then we own a piece of this. All right, so that's just a little bit, sort of teeing up what leadership for the future is. What questions do you have about this model? Can you think of any examples of people who fall into either of these that you might know? I see some nodding. So people often ask me, can you name an example? Say it again. Michael Scott from The Office. That's so good. I'm always reluctant to name people who I haven't worked with directly, although I can think of certainly some folks in the media who come to mind with both of these, actually. Michael Scott, a fictional character from The Office, yes. Which side would you put him on? The better model. I'm like, maybe I need to catch up on The Office. I like your sense of humor. I think that's where we're going with this. I think it's hard to think of people we haven't worked with directly that fill these, but I think if you think about people that you've interacted with, maybe they were like an actual supervisor in a job, maybe they were a professor or even a group leader that you worked with on a project, you can kind of put them into one or the other of these categories. I know for me, when I think of traditional alpha, I often think of Steve Jobs, who I know where I'm from in Silicon Valley is lionized. Like he was an incredibly creative and innovative person, but he fulfilled a lot of those qualities on the left-hand side. And I know from talking with people who worked with him, he was a very difficult leader in a lot of ways. And people say, well, he was still really successful. And I would just say, pause and think about if he embodied more on the right side, how much more successful he could have been and that organization could have been as well. All right. So how do we fix what's broken? How do we get to a new and better model, right? How do we move from that left status quo, traditional alpha, to the right side of a better model, leaders for the future? Honestly, I think we could spend all day, all week, maybe the rest of our lives talking about that. I think there's a lot of good answers. When Corey and Matt and I were thinking about this session and how to spend our time, we thought it made sense to focus on the most high leverage leadership competencies that were going to be the most relevant to the folks in this room. So we're focusing on 2 approaches to leadership that will help you get towards that better model. One is this idea of authentic leadership. Anyone heard of that term? Sort of floating around a bit. Up until very recently, it was like a very fluff term. Like, what is authentic leadership? Like, be yourself. Luckily, social science research in the last 10 years or so has really caught up, and we have a good idea of what that looks like and how to do it. We're also going to talk about collective leadership. Again, this idea of not just me being a push or pull force as a leader, but what does it mean to lead as part of a collective, a group of people? So authentic leadership's a little bit more on the personal aspects of leadership, and collective, which we'll talk about later, is a little bit more on the group or interpersonal aspects. Again, I think there are a lot of topics we could have focused on here. Some of them came up when you all were doing call-outs about how bad leaders made you feel, right? Like, we could have focused on ethics. I think leaders with emotional intelligence, that's another one. But our hope is that if we do this right today in terms of how we spend our time, you're going to leave this session not only with increased competency as a leader today, but really tangible and applicable skills and learnings that you can use going forward. All right. Questions about the model, the better model, or anything we've covered so far? You ready to dive in? All right, I like it. All right, let's dive into authentic leadership, defining your personal leadership identity. Can I have someone read this quote, please?
There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost.
That was amazing. That was very good. Thank you. I feel like in a meta level, this relates to what we're about to talk about, like special skills and unique talents. Anyway, we'll get to that. All right, so what does that quote mean to you? You did such a good job rating, now you have to kind of think about it.
Do what you need to do.
Do what you need to do. Yep. What else? Anyone else? What does this mean? Don't let yourself be stifled. Yep. What else? That each of us is unique? Oh, sorry, I thought that was an advert. Uniquely. I'm like, uniquely. Yeah, each of us is unique. Yep. Each of us has a unique set of skills and gifts. Yep. What else?
One shot.
Oh, one shot. Yep. One shot to be yourself and put it out there for the world. Yep. What else?
If you don't do it, then it doesn't exist, and it's lost for not just yourself, but everybody else.
Yep. This idea that we all have a unique set of qualities and characteristics and gifts that make us us, and it is our role and responsibility to bring it forward in the world, because if we don't, it's just not going to happen. Nobody else has that unique combination. Yeah, I think you've all hit on it really well. I think fundamentally, personal leadership identity is about being who you are and not trying to fit yourself into the mold of what we think a leader should be. And I'll give you a really good example. Growing up, I had the opportunity, actually when I was in college, to see Nelson Mandela speak, former president of South Africa. And then later in my career, I actually got to visit South Africa and see Robben Island and learn a lot more about him. He is sort of, for most of my adult life, been someone who I really look up to as a leader, and I think had a very interesting perspective. But you can imagine if I tried to embody Nelson Mandela up here today, it would be super awkward. I tend to move around a lot. I'm very Italian. We use gestures. He has a different kind of presence, and it would be weird if I tried to be Nelson Mandela. So I think it serves me to think about what were his values and how do those align with who I am, and there's probably a deeper connection there. But I do think early on, and I see this all the time in my coaching practice, We get an idea in our mind of what a good leader looks like, right? And we want to try to be that person, and it actually then stifles this like vitality or life force, our own natural, authentic approach to leadership, which is actually likely to be more effective. So that's why I share this quote. So we're going to dive into figuring out your own personal leadership identity. One thing I will say, though, is that this tends to be a fast-paced activity, so you might feel like, I'm not having enough time to do what I need to do. It is designed to be that way. It works better that way. So I would say lean into that discomfort a little, but it is okay if you feel like a little bit stressed and uncomfortable. That said, I also, as I said, am Italian. We tend to talk really fast. So if I am talking too fast, you can go ahead and give me the signal to turn it down. All right, so we're going to start. You should all have, I think the table facilitators have these on your table, or it's in your folder. Is it? Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Thank you, Corey, for making that happen. A worksheet called My Top 20 Accomplishments on page 1. It is underneath the program. What we are going to do is I am going to, in a moment, give you 8 minutes. And I want you to list all of your top 20 accomplishments. The instructions for this are important, though. These should be things at which you succeeded and which gave you a sense of pride and or happiness. So I will give you an example of something, the type of thing you would not put on here. In graduate school, I was very good at data analysis. People are always sending me their data to like crunch and run some regressions on. I was good at it. I hated it. I did not enjoy doing it at all. I try not to do it whenever possible now. I would not put that on this list. Something I would put on the list, that's not necessarily something I'd put on my resume, is that when I was in the 2nd grade, I built a really cool fort out of this excess plywood that was sort of laying around my neighborhood. So you can put personal things as long as they qualify at things that you were successful at and that gave you a sense of pride and or happiness. They can be from your professional career or your life, from when you were a toddler. Anywhere in between is fine. They don't have to be things you'd put on your resume. You will not be forced to share them with anyone, so I would really put things that are meaningful to you. The last piece of advice I will say is, if you are like most of us, the first 1 or 2, maybe even 3, will come very easily to you, and then all of a sudden you'll be like, what else have I done with my life? So for me, I would say, I was the first in my family to graduate from college. I started my own organization. I have a wonderful, tiny human being who I am co-creating. It seems to be going well so far. Another one on the way. And then I'm like, what else have I done with my life? That's normal, but you have to dig really deep and try to get to 20. You will get more out of this activity if you get to 20. So if you feel like this sort of inner critic looking over your shoulder saying like, that doesn't count, ignore the inner critic, put whatever comes to mind. That is a better option. What questions do you have about the instructions? People look scared and excited. Great. Okay, 8 minutes, starting now. All right, time is up. Hopefully you have about 20 at this point or very near there. All right, let's talk about how this activity went for you. How was this? Easy, hard, something else? Hard? Why was it hard? All right, so you have like a natural future orientation. It can be hard to sometimes like turn off that part of your brain and look backward. Yeah. Anyone else find it hard? Yeah. Why was it hard? Yeah.
I said I was having a lot of trouble saying like, oh, that's not that important or that's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And I'm currently
Yep.
If I just do my best,
Yep.
then that's fine. That's
Yeah. We all have this sort of like inner critic that sits on our shoulder that's like, oh, that's not good enough, or that's not perfect, so it doesn't qualify as something that, would be an accomplishment. I think especially we live in a world, and I don't think this is a bad thing, that values humility also. I think especially women, this is true for some men too though, we're socialized to be humble and not necessarily shout out our accomplishments. So when you're put in a context where you have to do that, it can feel really awkward and uncomfortable. Yep, I'm glad you shared that, yeah.
It's also what her said about like thinking about things in the future. So I put like a couple things that like I hope happen. Like I've kept my plants alive for 1 month. I'm hoping they stay.
Yeah.
But like
The mini accomplishment on the way. Yeah, actually, I think that's not a bad strategy, right? If you have like a long-term goal and you've made some progress toward it, that progress in of itself can be an accomplishment. And that helps you get some things down on paper. I mean, if it makes you feel better, told you one of mine was like building a fort. Another one was I spelled the word oven correctly in a second grade spelling bee. Second grade was like a very big year in my life for accomplishments. Trying to think, I bake an amazing lemon meringue pie. I mean, these are not things that I would necessarily, other than today, share publicly, or put on my resume or anything like that. But if you want to get to 20, it's really important that you think of things that are outside of what the world tells you are your accomplishments. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't think that the things I wanted to put down were like big enough.
Yep.
So I was just like, well, I only got like 3, so that's it.
I love it. So it's hard to think of things that feel big enough to go on that list. Yeah? Yeah, and we have this like critic that says, oh, like maybe this, but that's not important enough. Even though I told you, just put whatever comes to mind. I shared some of my incredibly dorky ones that I don't necessarily think any of you would think are accomplishments, but they did meet the criteria. So I would say just try really hard to think about things that meet both of those criteria, whether or not you feel like they deserve to be on there or not. Yeah. Other folks, how'd you experience this? Anyone find it easy? Yeah.
Was thinking a lot about myself at first, and then I was thinking about what I also accomplished for others. And so that was kind of a different perspective that I wanted to take.
Yeah. So sometimes it can be hard if we put ourselves in this mindset of what did I accomplish, but then if you open it up to what did I accomplish with and through others, it can feel a little bit more comfortable putting ideas down. I think that's a really good point. I think it's going to relate really nicely to the content we're going to talk about on collective leadership. Yeah. So essentially, all of this is about really digging into who we are as human beings so we can figure out how to live and lead authentically. And you might say, like, that sounds great, Danielle, like authentic leadership, sure, we should all do that, but why does it actually matter? There's actually really good research, again, behind this that I'm going to share with you, because I think if we didn't know this research, we might, again, just think it was like a fluff concept, like a warm, fuzzy, like, yeah, we should do this in a perfect world. But actually, the ability to be authentic and really know who we are and reflect honestly on our experiences does help us to be better leaders. So again, personal leadership identity, what we're digging into now, is one way of understanding our authentic leadership style. And authentic leadership is the ability to be self-aware, to know ourselves, and then act authentically or genuinely in our actions and interactions with others. We have to know who we are and really bring that person to the table in terms of how we work with and interact with others. It's also believed to be positively correlated with a couple of important outcomes. I'm not going to list them all, but number one, it will make you a better leader if you're able to act authentically, and it relates to greater personal happiness and well-being for you, the leader, and interestingly, for the people around you. So if you're able to really own who you are and bring that to the table every day, not only are you going to be happier, but the folks who you work with are also. And I think it's worth pausing and thinking about, have you ever worked with a leader like that, who just really brought their whole self to the table? They're amazing. Like, they seem so inspired and excited about the work that it's hard not to also feel that same sense of happiness or even fulfillment along with them. All right, so the next thing I want you to do is take that list of hopefully 20 or nearabouts, or maybe if you're male, more than 20, and pick your top 5. Then you're going to flip the page over, and you're going to write down my top 5 accomplishments. These do not have to be in order, so number 1 isn't necessarily more important than number 5. And I'm not going to tell you how to define your top 5. It is however you define them. You have 4 minutes to do this. calculated, it looks like most of you have about 5. How was that experience of going from 20 to 5? There's some nodding. Some people, feels good. Why does it feel good? Or why does it feel bad? Yeah. Mic coming. Sorry. Corey, you're amazing. Thank you.
So for me, I first started off with the 25, and I was like, okay, well, what have I kind of done to the past, in the past that kind of led up to now? And so the 5, one of the things that, really triggered and transformed my life was I was homeless, actually, during finals week. And I wound up passing all of my classes, even now. I'm excelling in all of my classes with A's, and I'm just in a healthy environment. And I'm so happy because now I can share my story with so many other people, and that was a kind of a transitional moment.
Yeah.
So when you think about the accomplishments that you had in the past, and then what leads you up to now, what you're currently accomplishing, it's just means so much more. Just every day, just waking up with gratitude. So.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm sorry you had to go through that. But second of all, I think there's a really important lesson in what you're saying is that sometimes certain events are so significant, like these crucible moments in our life, that it's hard to compare anything else to them. I think that's a really good point. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What else? Anyone else find this easy, hard? Yeah.
I think I found this harder because each accomplishment is part of our life, so it's kind of hard to figure out which one are your top 5 because each accomplishment, it has a way to find you. Without one, you wouldn't be the same as you are today. So just picking the top 5 is a very difficult decision because every accomplishment is important. Every accomplishment has helped you along your way to get you where you are.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Stephen King, the writer, has an expression, you have to kill your darlings. And I feel like when people go through this, you're killing your darlings. You're like, which of my 20 darlings or more am I going to kill just to get down to 5? Because it feels like if you take away any one of those, it's not who you are. So I'll ask you a question then. How many of you, your top 5, looked exactly like the first 5 things you wrote down? Anyone? It's like 1 or 2 people, 3. 4 or 5. Okay, so a very small proportion of people, the first 5 things you wrote down ended up being your top 5. For most of us, though, our top 5 actually come from across the list. Anyone feel like their top 5 came from even more like the bottom of their list? So a couple of those, right? Even more people, right, found their top 5 at the bottom of their list. So people always ask, for the next part of this activity, we're really going to focus on those top 5. And they say, well, Danielle, why'd you make me write out 20 if we were only going to start with 5? And this is exactly why I have you write out 20. Because if I ask you to name your top 5 accomplishments, you would probably just list those first 5 things that come to mind, because that is what the world tells you are your most important accomplishments. But when you actually dig into all of your accomplishments, you think about not just, what's on my resume or what do I feel comfortable sharing with others, but maybe what's the most meaningful or the most impactful thing I've gone through that sort of eclipses all others. And I find that most of the time the top 5 don't actually match the first 5 things you wrote down, although a few of you got lucky and they probably do. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is really dig into those top 5 accomplishments to figure out our own personal leadership identity. So personal leadership identity, again, is one way of really thinking about authentic leadership. Who am I as a leader? What makes me unique and distinctive? And how can I act with authenticity and be genuine in my actions and interactions with others? And there are 5 things you're going to look at. So you're looking at your top 5 accomplishments, and you're going to say, what do these top 5 tell me about my values? Values are things that are important to you, so it might be things like family, time, making an impact. You don't have to get started now. I'm just sort of explaining the concept. 2, look across those top 5. What do they tell me about my character strengths? These are your best personal qualities or attributes, things like courage, persistence, kindness. And you might say, I don't know, is this a value or a character strength? It honestly doesn't matter how you define them. I might call something a value. You might call it a character strength. It's fine as long as you get it recorded and note it. Doesn't matter what you call it. Then you're going to look at those top 5 and say, what do these tell me about my professional skills? I love this, given that most of us are students in the room today. So you'll be thinking about abilities that you gain through learning or training. These might relate to your career or future career aspirations. They might not. But what do those top 5 tell me about things that I've learned that I've become good at because I've been trained in them? So it might be like math, data analysis. I always give the example. I did this activity with a really large group of educators, and there was one woman in the front row who's like, I'm looking at these top 5. I don't see any professional skills. And then she was sharing them with her colleague next to her, and he's like, well, they're all teaching related. She's like, I know, like, what's the skill? And he was like, I think it's teaching. So sometimes it is like painfully obvious, even though you're like, wait, what is it? I think especially as college students, there are probably some amazing skills that most of you share, having gone through this experience. But yeah, sometimes you have to dig deep for those. Also, what do your top 5 tell you about your passions or interests? These are things that make you feel excited, curious, or energized. Harry Potter should definitely be up there for me. I know that's a typo. So it might be something that relates to your major or the work that you do day in and day out as a student or volunteer work or sports or activities. It might be totally unrelated. It might be something very specific, like I'm totally passionate about the Supreme Court of the United States. I don't know, I think it's so interesting. That's very specific. It might be creating and building, just in general. I'm passionate about creating new things. Any one of those is fine. And the last thing you're going to look at with regard to your top 5 accomplishments is, what do they tell me about my ideal success conditions? This is super important in terms of being able to act authentically. Many of us forget about this, but there certain conditions that make us more successful, right? Like I might be a super night owl, and I notice a lot of those accomplishments are things that I did at like 2 a.m. in the morning. Now that I'm a mom, that's not actually the case because I would be sleeping then. But I had a friend who used to get up at like 5 a.m. in the morning. That was like her prime. Every single big thing she ever did started at 5 a.m. in the morning. It was amazing. It might be that you need quiet space, or that you need to be around a group of people. This kind of gets back to your point about, I look at my accomplishments and see a lot of them have to do with other people as well. It might be, though, that you need some like alone thinking time. That's fine, too. Might be, hey, these are all outdoor things. But really look carefully at those top 5 and see what they tell you about your ideal success conditions. I'm going to give you about 7 minutes, and you're going to write down your analysis here on page 2 in these 5 boxes. What questions do you have about this? You all are a dive-in type of group. I like it. The only thing I will say is get as many as you can, as many ideas as you can. It's not like, what's one value that I see across all 5 of these accomplishments? Like if you see multiple values, make sure those all get recorded in the value box. All right, I will set the timer and circulate. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. All right, so let's chat about how that went. Normally when I get to this part, I'm like, how'd it go? People are like, we really struggled. But as I said, you all are a really fast group, so I'm super curious to hear, how did this go for you? How was it going from these sort of big ideas of accomplishments and then really analyzing them for these 5 components? Easy, hard? What did you learn? What seemed interesting? Any interesting themes? Yes, sorry, Mike. But I will repeat what you say also.
I thought it was a little bit more difficult because my top 5 were really school-based, and I never saw my values related to school. It was more family-oriented.
Interesting.
So like one I wrote for like number 3 was like that I was a role model for my brother and my cousins. So I kind of pulled a lot of my values out of one specific one. Yeah. And then pulled like partnering ones from the rest.
Yeah. So that's interesting. When you think about values, you're like, not all of these like easily lend themselves to values. I would say, so let's imagine some of these are like academic achievements, just to sort of simplify. There are probably some values we can pull out of that, though, right? Like what kind of values would we see in academic achievement? Dedication, work ethic, perseverance, probably achievement would be a big one. Like you value achieving things. Yeah. Any others? That might be a professional skill. I don't know. Well, you know what? I might call it a professional skill. You might call it a value. Yeah, so I would say there probably are some values in there. If you find a lot of your top 5 are very similar and you're not able to pull values, I would think that I would reframe how you're thinking about values, because there might be some good nuggets in there. But that's an interesting point. Some of them lend themselves so easily, right? We're like, oh, my family, or, like connecting with others. And then others are like, what is the value in that? Yeah. Other folks, how was your experience with this? Yeah, in the back. Thank you for the mic runners. I'm sorry you're getting so much exercise, but exercise is good and important for self-care, so you're welcome also.
Hi. When I did this activity, I feel like it correlated with my top 5 accomplishments.
Yeah.
So I feel like it really defines who I am as a person, especially with the things I do every day. Whether it comes to helping even like a simple teacher or being involved with community involvement, I feel like my values, and I'm proud of who I am, and what makes me who I am. And I'm happy to be this person. So.
Awesome. Is that true just across the values, or did the other ones seem to resonate as well?
Oh, like my character strengths and my professional skills. Like, I consider myself a really good at socializing and communication. So it does, and most of my accomplishments does revolve me doing such things. So it really matched me. Yeah,
so I think I hear you saying, like, in some ways this was really affirming, right? Like, I thought these things about myself, and then going through the activity, I'm like, yep, they're getting affirmed back. I will say sometimes that's people's experience with this. Sometimes that is not the experience. Sometimes you get other things back where you're like, I would have never thought about that. Anyone have any themes that came up for them in this where you're like, oh, I would have never thought about that for myself? Yeah, there's a hand there. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I would say that courage is a characteristic that I would most admire in other people, but it's not necessarily something that I would describe myself as.
Yeah.
But as I'm going through the list of the 5 things, at least 3, maybe 4 of them are all courage-based.
Yeah.
So that feels really awesome.
Yeah, you're like, oh, this is affirming. I didn't know if I had this. I will say it's so interesting you bring up that example, because when I first designed and did this activity, which was now years ago, courage was a big one for me that I really expected to show up. I thought certainly if you asked me my top 5 values, I would have said courage, and it didn't come up in any of my accomplishments. And it really made me pause and think about, is courage like an aspirational value for me, right? Where I want to have it, but I don't, or is it somehow I just missed it? And honestly, I think it was like a combination of both. I think there were a lot of hard situations where I was like, oh, I actually probably didn't act with as much courage as I wanted to. And I think that's okay as leaders too. Sometimes we realize oh, I really want to be this kind of person, but are my day-to-day actions and the things that I'm doing actually honoring that? I'm glad in your case that it was. I think in my case, it made me realize I needed to make some pivots to be more courageous in my life and work. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Other things that came up for folks that either affirmed what you knew or felt different and new. Yep, in the back.
So I think that oftentimes I get lost in the day-to-day workings of life.
Yep.
And whether it's different avenues of family, work, school, whatever it may be. But I definitely lose myself. And something that came up a lot here was self-care. It's really important to take a moment and just take a few moments to kind of recoup so that your future endeavors can go more smoothly and you can be more successful with a clear mind. So obviously exercise, eating well, but an important one for me was wine.
Was wine?
Yeah.
There's
don't feel guilty that you want to have a glass of wine with dinner.
Moderation.
You deserve it.
Everything in moderation, including moderation. There is one of my favorite quotes in the book from my spouse, where he says, "Never doubt the wine and Post-its can be a powerful combination." So I will say I don't know that that's everyone's cup of tea or wine, what have you. But yeah, if there's some little treat that you enjoy now and again, and you're using it in a healthy and responsible way, I think that's great. I'm glad you actually brought up the idea of self-care as well, because that's something that I think has become so much more prevalent for the sort of rising generation of leaders that honestly I think the previous generation of leaders has largely ignored, and to our detriment. There's a chapter in the New Alpha book, chapter 3, Prioritize Your Health and Wellness. I wanted to make it actually chapter 1, but McGraw-Hill, my publisher, was like, we can't have a business book where it's chapter 1. So it's chapter 3, but secretly, you can think of it as chapter 1. And it's all about what is the research behind self-care and what are the practices that we need in order to be healthy and happy and effective as leaders in the long run, because we often sacrifice those things in the short run. And I don't want to pretend that there aren't times where we just have like really stressful moments in life where we do kind of put those to the wayside and we just have to kind of push through. I think that's a reality for a lot of us. But in the long run, if you find you're not getting enough sleep, you're not getting enough movement, there's great research now that even walking outside in nature, I read barefoot. I'm imagining like all of us in our future jobs, like walking outside barefoot in the grass. I'm not sure that's realistic, but I love that it is good for you and it actually relates to long-term good outcomes in terms of your own health and wellness and your ability to make the kind of impact in the world that you want to make. So I think that's great. Any other final thoughts on this in terms of reflections or things that came up for you? Yeah.
I think when I've done this before, sometimes I have thought about what's not on my list, but the older that I get, the more I lean into my strengths and just go, like, for example, I am not your one to go through and be the really tasky leader. I'm an empathetic leader, I'm relational, I'm gonna go to coffee and network with folks, and that's just who I am. And so the older I get, the more comfortable this exercise is because it's just who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're hitting on one of my favorite, this is just a regular article. It was, I think, in the Harvard Business Review, is called The Incomplete Leader. It's by a really famous sort of leadership guy, Peter Senge, and a bunch of his colleagues. And basically, they were like, it is a myth that leaders need to be perfect, right? Like, we imagine, oh, I have to be flawless across all these categories, right? Like, I have to be the taskmaster and the relationship person, and I have to remember all the processes. Actually, that's not true. You're just going to be spread thin, and you're not going to be acting authentically. You have to know who you are and what you bring to the table, and really leverage that as much as possible, and then surround yourself with people who fill the gaps. So I'm not saying that like ignore your gaps if you have them, right? It is good to be aware of the competencies that you don't have or that aren't as strong or that you just don't enjoy using as much. But you got to surround yourself with good people for whom that is part of their natural, authentic self. And then you're going to have a robust team that really, taken as a whole, does create a complete leader. Yep, I think that's a great point. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is synthesize all of this. Oh, these are just some examples. You guys didn't need them, so I didn't put them up. Although I will say Harry Potter is on there because I like to drop Harry Potter in as much as possible to sessions like this. All right, what you're going to do is take your analysis and you are going to synthesize it into a one-sentence statement. This will be your personal leadership identity statement. Every single person in this room will have a different one. You can use whatever format you want. Some people like to have a template, so I put them at the bottom of your worksheet. So you might say, driven by this or that value, I use this strength or skill to do whatever I'm passionate about or interested in. Or you might say, driven by this passion or interest, I use this strength or skill to do whatever it is I value. Clearly, based on most of your very impressive analyses, you have way more vocabulary on your sheet than you're going to put into one sentence, so you can't use all the words and themes that came up. This is really an exercise in looking through that analysis and picking just some of the key points. If it's helpful to use one of those templates to kind of guide your thinking as you draft this, please do so. I've had other people just say, like, I'm Danielle, I'm empathetic, resourceful, and gritty, right? Just like 3 key words that jump out. That's fine. Some people like a slogan. I was teaching a class at Stanford and someone said, just do it. And that really for them encapsulated the whole of who they were as a leader. I told someone else that though in another class and they said, just do it, ... but do it right the first time. So that for them felt authentic. Any of that is fine. You can create your own slogan. You can use one that exists, but just make sure you get one sentence down that really honors that analysis you did. And again, it doesn't have to be set in stone. You can leave this session today and later tonight be like, oh, that's not quite right. I'm going to rewrite it or tweak it. You can look at it a week from now, a month from now, a year from now and redo it, but try to get something down. What questions do you have? Okay, let's start with 3 minutes, see what we can get out. All right, so again, hopefully at this point all of us have a drafty draft. It does not have to be permanent. You can look at it later and change it. Any brave volunteers want to share their drafty draft? Yes, in the back. Don't worry, Siri, we've got it covered.
Comes for young people.
Sorry, can you start again?
I'm driven by improving teaching to improve learning outcomes for young people, so the world is led by disciplined leaders who value individuals and groups, who move with a purpose to serve others.
I love it. Round of applause. As a former teacher, educator, that makes my heart sing. Who else would like to share? Yes.
I deploy interactive learning adventures.
Oh, I love it. Pithy, but to the point. Good. Yep, who else? In the back over there. Pink shirt.
I am driven by making an impact. I use my generosity and organizational skills to help others. Driven by self-expression, I use my courage and advocacy skills to care for myself.
Oh, beautiful. Wonderful. And your neighbor next to you.
Driven by the feel of accomplishment and success, I use my upbeat and strong personality and knowledge in numbers and insurance to help others and work on hard tasks.
Oh, beautiful. Last one, and then we'll do a table group where you can share more.
When you look at yourself in the bathroom mirror every morning and reflect on your heroes and role models, think of your future self and everything else will fall in place.
Oh, I love it. Y'all did a great job. This is a good mix of some people followed the template and really made it work or adapted, and some people just totally did their own, and that worked as well. Yeah, super inspiring to hear. I want to make sure, I would love to hear all of yours, but I want to make sure we have time to discuss in small groups. So for our final activity for this part of the session, I want you should have Post-it notes, I think, on your table. Are there Post-its? Am I wrong? Yeah, yes, your table facilitators should be able to find them. And I want you to answer these two questions, just a quick minute free write. I won't start the timer until I'm finished. What did you learn about yourself from this activity? What surprised you? And in particular, what qualities do you bring to the table that are really going to support you to be a successful leader? And then how can you use this information to enhance your life and career? Just 60 seconds, free thought, whatever comes to mind. Put down on that Post-it. Each of you is doing it individually, and then I'll open it up, the tables, what we can discuss. So this should be quiet just for the first minute. All right, once you have your thoughts down on the Post-it, just some quick thoughts that come to mind. I'm going to open it up to your table group so you can discuss. I'll circulate because I'd love to hear. Just discuss your responses to these questions. I'm going to give you 8 minutes to do that. Alrighty, let's regroup and wrap up the conversation on personal leadership identity. The main point, as we discussed, of really digging into personal leadership identity is thinking about how do we bring more authenticity to our life and leadership. Hopefully this activity has given you an opportunity to think about that in ways you haven't before. Hopefully you either got some affirmation about things you knew about yourself, or maybe even gained some new insights as well. I would just keep in mind this idea that we talked about with the incomplete leader, right? Like, you don't have to be everyone, and you don't have to exactly match what you think the paradigm of a perfect leader is. but you do have to know who you are as an individual and bring that person to the table if you want to really optimize not only your leadership effectiveness, but thinking back to the research, your own long-term happiness and fulfillment in life and that of those around you. So please keep that in mind. The other thing is that second bullet point, how can you use this information to enhance your life and career? I think it's totally okay to use what you came up with today to think about how do I use what I learned about myself to describe myself in future career situations. I know a lot of people that use this, for example, their final personal leadership identity statement, like on their LinkedIn profile, for example. I think it's a great way when someone says, you know, like that 30-second elevator pitch, right? I'm riding up the elevator with someone says, who are you or what do you do? You're like, actually, I've just dug into that and I can tell you. So I would say find something that you feel comfortable actually saying. Sometimes at first they can feel a little clunky when you're kind of drafting them, but keep working on it until it feels really authentic and natural. And then those conversations are going to go really smoothly and you'll have something to say, I think, in career pitches. And so not only will it help you in your life and leadership, but it's just kind of like a nice practical skill to have. All right, the next thing we're going to dive into is collective leadership, but I do think this is kind of a cognitively intense activity. And the next one is intense in different ways. So I'm going to take a quick, let's say, 10-minute break. I'm on Apple time here. It says 10:51. We will get rolling at 11:01, so try to be back here by like 10:58 or so. But walk around, get some water, get some snacks, use the restroom. We will get rolling at 11:01.
All right, folks, as we transition back into it, I was amiss in the fact that we forgot to recognize a few people. And one of the things, when it comes to recognizing VIPs and great supporters of our program, one of the greatest tests in terms of these events is sometimes people show up and then leave before the first break. So that's why we recognize these folks that stayed after that first break. So let's recognize a few people who definitely have been great supporters of our program and the work that we do throughout the university. First of all, Dr. Dean Jeff Chamberlain, thank you for being here today.
Woo! And good contributions to the discussion.
Exactly. We also have the chairman of our committee, the Taylor Leadership Institute Community Council, Navy Captain Rick Hoffman.
Woo!
From the Environmental Center, Maria Mark.
Woo!
And Associate Dean for the College of Education Human Services, Dr. Jen Kane. And for all those community members who are here today, thank you for really being major stakeholders in our success, both on campus and in the community. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you introed those folks because I thought, who are these amazing people? And now I know all their names, which I appreciate. All right, we are going to dive into the second part of today's session, which is learning to be a collective leader. Can I have a volunteer? I'm inclined to call on our resident quote speaker, but I would like a new volunteer to read this quote. Yes.
Our lives are not our own. We are bound to others, past and present, and by each crime and every kindness we birth our future.
Yep, that's exactly correct. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's the title quote in the New Alpha book, and I think it just reinforces this idea that we are all connected. I use this quote here because I think more and more in the modern world, when we think about leadership, we're thinking not about just this single sort of solitary push or pull force, but the real interconnectedness of all of us as human beings and how that affects leadership. So let's dive into this idea of collective leadership. In your table groups, just spend about 3 minutes discussing, what does this mean to you? What is collective leadership? Alrighty, let's regroup. I feel like this is another one where we could spend like a day talking about this. I love it. Anyone from a table group want to share just a few quick high-level ideas that came up for your group when you talked about what is collective leadership. Who can share some ideas? Yep. Oh, good. The mic is right behind you. That was so perfectly timed.
So we kind of just talked about, sorry, am I being too loud? Collective leadership, kind of what we're doing right now, kind of just discussing in a group and brainstorming ideas and kind of just putting our input into as a group, so collective group.
Yeah, so there's this like group element of it. There's a sort of dynamic of no particular person being in charge, all voices heard. Is that kind of hitting on what you're saying? A couple of the kids. Yeah, what about over here?
Sorry, no, just going off of that too, that how I see collective leadership as a leader yourself, it's not somebody to be on top, but somebody who's with the group or even in a subservient position to build others up and help others.
Yeah, I think you're hitting really well on this idea of servant leadership, which was one of the most powerful forms of leadership. This idea, again, that our role as leaders isn't necessarily to be a push or pull force. This kind of came up this morning. It's coming up a couple of times, but really to serve others as a leader and remove obstacles as necessary. Yeah, what else came up? Yep.
So when I think about collective leadership, it is being able to be a leader that can trust your team and work collaboratively with your team and know that the work is going to be done for the whole of the group.
Yeah, trust, collaboration, and I think there's another unspoken piece in what you're saying that's really profound, and that is this idea that when you can do that well, there's a sense of empowerment amongst the folks on the team and probably ownership as well. Yeah. What about this side of the room? Yes. Back kind of corner, but yes, you waving the hand. I like it. Yes. Yeah, it is you. Yeah, I love it.
I kind of came more from an academic standpoint, because we actually talk about this in my degree program. Organizational communication, we talk about top-down and bottom-up. So top-down traditionally is always the boss just kind of ordering everyone underneath.
Yeah.
And then bottom-up is pretty much when all of those who are already working in the field can then contribute to a project, contribute to the campaign, give their own ideas, their own input. They see what's needed and they're able to provide their opinion that actually helps the cause, the organization, the campaign, whatever it may be.
Yep, absolutely. Kind of getting away from this top-down, more traditional alpha structure, thinking about how to get voices from all across an organization, but particularly maybe voices that are more underrepresented, like the grassroots level. Yep, I think that's exactly right. I became really interested in, one more, Go ahead. Oh, we're getting the mic for you, sorry.
Thank you, Mike. Collective leadership. I feel that there are passive people, there are some aggressive people, but you want to have the healthy middle, which is assertive. And I feel that a collective leader, they take in everybody's ideas and make sure everyone's voice is heard. They don't let the aggressive people take over, but they make sure that the passive people get a word in edgewise as well.
Yeah.
And because that's, passive people, they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And, that allows, the aggressive people to, just take over.
Take over.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I feel that collective leadership is about finding that healthy balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two really important themes in what you're saying. One is the idea of making sure all voices are heard, and I think that really resonates with some of the other comments that have come up. And the other is, it's totally like escaping me at the moment. Hold on, it'll come to me. I think just the idea of having a sense of balance, right? You want balance across groups. And this resonates with the idea we talked about earlier of the incomplete leader, right? No one has to be all one thing or all another. You want like a balance of qualities. I think those are both great points. So I became interested in this topic a couple years ago because I noticed this phrase, collective leadership, was like popping up more and more in my work across all different sorts of organizations, like corporate, nonprofit, education. And I thought, what do we mean when we're saying this? And I think the conversations today kind of demonstrate that there's a lot of ways that you can interpret collective leadership. And so I thought, well, I'm going to dig into the research and see what do researchers say about this. And their conversations are basically exactly the same as our conversation today. They all have different thoughts on what collective leadership is. So if you look at this term and you're like, that's a little vague and hazy, You're not alone. The brightest minds across the world, I think, are grappling with what exactly this is and what it looks like. And depending on your discipline or your field, and this gets back to like your perspective as someone in communications, like you might have a different perspective on what it is. So for some folks, you can still have a traditionally hierarchical organization, but maybe you have a CEO in charge who's really empowering to their senior leadership team, and those folks each own, a piece of the work. Or maybe you're part of a group or organization where there are no formal leaders, right? Like everyone owns a piece of it. And there are many other configurations. I think the key point is that all of those key words that you all brought up are part of this, right? Like collaboration, balance, all voices being heard. There was another key one, making sure that, or not one single like role of a leader, but making sure everyone has some ownership or some empowerment of the vision. I think it is helpful to have a framework, so I have crafted one that may be helpful for you in thinking about this, but this is not the only way to think about collective leadership. I think there are 3 levels of leadership. Level 1 is actually less collective on the spectrum, and that's just, as a leader, can I set the vision, tell you where we're going, and then influence and motivate you to fulfill it? If you're able to do level 1 leadership, that's pretty good. It's not the most collective approach, but it's certainly not like a bad place to be. Level 2 is more like, I'm not just gonna set the vision, but let's talk together about where we think we're going together. There's a little bit more of a like collective or shared component to the vision, but I'm still the one that's really influencing and motivating, right? I'm the rallying cry, like let's get everyone going. You've probably all experienced maybe group projects, right, that kind of fall into level 2. And level 3, I think, is truly collective leadership. And this is when I, as a leader, am able to facilitate agreement around a collective vision and ensure co-ownership of the vision. It might be that we all in a group are level 3 leaders, right? When I say I just mean that's my role as a collective leader, but it doesn't preclude other people in the group from also demonstrating that quality. So we have a collective vision, we've all bought in, but I'm not like some driving force, right? Like I'm not cracking the whip, I'm not pushing or pulling. We all understand and own the vision or a piece there of it. All right, questions on this, or what parts of this resonate or don't make sense? Have you experienced this? Yeah.
I'm in an organization currently where I am attempting to do level 3, but it seems that the people around me are just so uninterested in working hard on anything that it ends up just being level 1.
Yeah, and I will say that's not bad. Level 1 isn't bad. I think there's probably also level 0 around here, which is like none of the above. We should have stated that, where there is kind of no vision. There might even be a level -1 where I am like anti all of this. So yeah, I will say in my own practice, right? Like I teach and facilitate this work all over the world. In my own practice, sometimes I fall into level 1. I think there are certain circumstances that just make that the only option or make it really hard. So I think it's a very fair point. Yeah, other folks. Yep.
It's more of a question.
Yeah.
So is this always like you have to be at that level, or could it just fluctuate, ebb and flow?
I will say, let me ask you, what do you think? Well, let's give her back the mic. Sorry. I'm like,
yeah, I think it moves and adjusts to different situations.
Totally. I agree. I think level 3 is really aspirational. I do think sometimes we hit on that, but I think there's a lot of contextual factors that affect that, and it's totally okay to go back and forth. What I want you to do when you look at this framework is not say like, oh, I always have to be level 3, but, oh, level 3 is an option that maybe I'm not considering as often as I should. Maybe I've been living in level 2 a lot, and I could move towards level 3 in some context, but I think it's, again, a really fair point that sometimes we fluctuate. I hope you're not in level -1, right, where you're just sort of like a destructive force, because that can be problematic as well. Yeah. I was like, let's see how we can get people running as far as possible across this room. Again, I skipped my workout today, but I feel like I'm making up for it, and others too.
So one of the things that kind of resonated for me, I read this book, I'm not sure if you read it, but It's effective leadership principles.
I don't think so.
The leadership challenge.
Oh yeah, I know
The
that. They're
leadership
so
challenge.
great.
And so one of the things that they talk about in the book is nobody will believe the message if they cannot believe the messenger. And so when it talks about collective leadership, motivating others and influencing others, a part of a vision, it's very important because sometimes people can be a part of something they feel like just another number, especially in large businesses and large organizations. So a part of collective leadership is always just having that mindset and whatever I'm doing, what does it mean to me?
Yeah.
And how can I be influential? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain aspect of mindfulness that you're hitting on too, just like pausing to reflect and say, what am I contributing to this, right? And I think sometimes we think, oh, it has to be someone with this designated title or role, right? There were some guys like back in the 1950s. This is one of my favorite papers to quote. Even professors are like, it's so super old. French and Raven, they talked about bases of power, right? Like, how do people get power? And one way is through like title or position or dang, you can punish or fire me. It is true. So sometimes we look at people who have that and we were like, oh, they're powerful, they're the leaders. But also there's this idea of like influence and human connection and who you really resonate with as a human being. And that can be a really powerful base of power as well. So sometimes it's good to pause and reflect and think maybe it's not the person with the title or the hiring or firing power that really is the leader in this group, right? Like maybe I can step up in some way. And I think we also should get away from this idea that there's like a single leader in every group. Yep, I think it's a great point. So I have a question for you all. Yeah, one more and then question.
Is this on? Okay, there we go. So my question would be, is level 3 leadership always the ideal place to be, or are there some scenarios where either it's not necessary or like level 2 would be better?
I'm gonna throw that back to you. What do you think?
I don't know.
Anyone else have a thought on that? I think it's a really good question. Yeah.
This could, from the Dynamics of Leadership book, which we're reading in Intro to Leadership, it kind of, you could, excuse me, connect it to the situational approach, where it depends with every situation you're thrown into, and it depends on your followers and how they react to your leadership style.
Yep, totally. I think that's a great answer. It tends to align with, I think, how I'd respond as well. I think sometimes in the world we want to have these like panacea, sort of cure-all, like, oh, I've been too much level 1, now I must be all level 3. But I think it gets back to your point about balance, right? Like, we actually need balance, and we as leaders need to read the situation and the context and figure out which approach is going to be the most appropriate and the most effective for the context. So I think that's a spot-on answer. My question for you now is, why or in what circumstances would a collective approach to leadership be better than the more like traditional alpha or status quo, single leader, domineering sort of push-pull force? Yeah.
I think in any situation where you need like creativity and I guess more delegating tasks as well, is when you need to be like more collective and more inclusive to where everyone needs to contribute.
Yeah, I think the creativity thing is a really interesting point. There was a survey of, I think, 1,500 global CEOs that came out a couple of years ago. And they said, what is the #1 leadership quality that folks need in the future for like the modern world going forward in the next like 20 years? And creativity, creative thinking was a big piece of that. And I think you're like making that connection. Sometimes when you have a more diverse group of voices, you're actually more likely to get like higher levels of creativity and then better, more robust outcomes. There's also some really good research in just organization theory that shows that as well. Diverse groups tend to come up with more robust, what I mean by that is outcomes that are higher quality and tend to stand the test of time. So yeah, that's a great point. Why else might collective leadership be a superior approach in some cases? Yep. Thank you.
Sustainability.
Yeah, say more.
So the idea that if one person is leading the organization and that person leaves, then what happens?
Yes.
And so you need to have others who understand what's going on, be a part of that process, so that way they can take that load, or someone has to be out temporarily. So just the idea of sustaining that momentum around what it is you're trying to do. So thinking about how are you developing others, so that way that will continue once you leave. So.
Yeah. Not just developing others, but really making sure others understand like where we're going together and feel ownership of that. Yeah, this happens all the time. You see like an amazing leader who creates great, positive change in the world, and then they leave whatever organization they're in, and it's like all the air's been sucked out of the room, right? Like everything just kind of stops. And I would say, I would really challenge you to think about, no matter how effective you are as a leader, if you leave that group or that organization and they're not still high functioning, then you weren't as effective as you thought you were. All right, so I have a question for you all. We're going to do an activity. I want you to take a moment, just 30 seconds, and kind of self-identify where you tend to fall on this spectrum, where your sort of dominant go-to is. For some of us, we might sort of fluctuate across levels, or even sometimes fall into level 0. Hopefully not level -1, right? The destructive force. But think about, where do you normally sort of fall on this? And then in table groups, I want you to discuss, what can today's leaders do to move towards a more collective leadership approach? I would say keep in mind, again, that there are certain situations where maybe collective wouldn't be your best tool in your toolkit, but think about, in general, if we want to move towards a more collective approach, what can leaders do to facilitate that? I'm going to give you 5 minutes in table groups. All righty, let's regroup. Hopefully you got some really good ideas from your team. I know it was fun to circulate and just sort of hear the different ideas percolating up. Hopefully you got some good ideas, because now you're going to have to actually put them into action for the next activity. Within your table groups, we are going to do something called the Marshmallow Challenge, which some of you may be familiar with. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Basically, on your table, facilitators can point this out, you should have 20 sticks of spaghetti, a yard of tape, a yard of string, and a large marshmallow. Please don't eat it. If that's already happened, come find one of us, and scissors. And your team's challenge is to build the tallest freestanding structure using only those materials. You have 18 minutes to do it. Don't worry, I haven't started the timer yet. And the winning team is the one that builds the tallest freestanding structure, which means it needs to be on your table and not supported by a chair or something that you've set on the table. And we're going to measure it from the tabletop to the top of the marshmallow. Oh, tape's over there. I feel like I need to say that. Yes. So once we start the timer going, don't do it yet. Oh my God, I love some people that are already at it. You can make sure to grab tape. Let me just say one thing. The entire marshmallow has to be on the top of your structure. Cutting or eating part of the marshmallow will disqualify your group. A couple of rules again. This is important. No external support. It has to exist on your tabletop. It can't be propped up by something that's not included in the materials list. Sorry, someone had a question? Wait, okay. People are getting tape. Let's get the tape and then I'll finish. But don't start building yet. We're having a tape extravaganza. I don't think it can be stopped. Yes. It will be measured from the tabletop to the top of the marshmallow. So I would say interpret that how you will. I'm going to measure from the tabletop to the top of the marshmallow, and there can be no external support. That's where I think you're going to run into trouble with yours. All right. Let me finish the instructions and some rules. Again, no external support. If your structure is held up by anything other than the table and those materials, you will be disqualified. Also, I feel like it goes without saying, but let's not damage the beautiful facilities that we have. Let's not cause any harm. Oh, and you cannot remove the tablecloth. Last point that I'm going to make, I can tell people are so jazzed. I'm jazzed to see what we do here. And that is that some of you may be familiar with this activity, and that is okay and good. We tried to pick an activity that most of you don't have experience in, but it will be interesting to see what kind of results you get if there's anyone in your group who's done this. All right, what questions do you have before I set the timer? Let me just say, when the timer goes off, if there is a single hand on your tower, you will be disqualified. I do disqualify groups virtually every time I run this activity, so I'm not kidding. 18 minutes starting now. Step back, step back, step back. All right. Step back. All right. You might, yeah, you're right. You might have won. You might have won. No, make note of the table. All right, first things first. Yes, you can eat the marshmallow now. All right, let's regroup. We do have a winner. In first place by 3/4 of an inch is Professor T's class. Right over there. Congratulations. Round of applause. Tied for second place with 14 inches, so close, was table 7. Where's table 7? Yeah. Yes. They actually were finished very early. Well, we'll talk more about what happened there. That was interesting. And tied for third place at 10 inches, both of these were 10 inches tall, is table 3 and table 8. Congratulations. There were a number of folks who were disqualified, but don't worry, it happens. It happens every time. And I appreciate your energy and enthusiasm for getting them to stand even as we hit time, although it did, in fact, disqualify a number of people. All right, so let's talk to the winning group. Professor Tryon, am I saying that correctly? Tryon, how did you decide on the design of the structure, which now looks like it's being altered and... Oh, we're eating it. Okay, how did you decide on the design? Microphone, please, thank you.
You know, I've just always been a big fan of squares. So we decided to go for a box-shaped base and then a teepee on top for maximum support.
How did you all decide that as a group, though?
Take it away.
Oops, sorry, my timer is letting me know.
So a couple of us have done this activity before, and so we found that like the base is most important, just kind of out of experience. And then something to hold the big old marshmallow on top kind of came together. I don't know.
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple of things, and actually I think this is good, because I said there are a few people in this room, not a large number of you, but a few people have done this before and maybe have some like institutional memory or experience. This totally mimics the real world, right? Like you're doing a product launch for a new product. Some people have done that before, or some people have familiarity with how to build that kind of product. Some people don't. So it is interesting that it sounds like there was more than one person though in this group. What I find particularly interesting is you're like the base is the most important part, because that is not always what people say who have gone through this experience before. So for you, though, it was the base. There was some, it sounds like, knowledge of what was going to be helpful in getting the task completed, and it sounds like everyone else was like happy to go with that. Yep. Okay, next question. How much time did you spend planning versus building? Do you remember?
I feel like we spent a lot of the time planning, and then it was kind of like, let's hope this works, and maybe we definitely did not spend enough time building, but somehow it happened.
Did. So it was a high-risk thing. Like you knew you were sucking up precious building time by planning, but you felt like you needed to get the plans right to make sure it was executed well.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask the other groups, groups 3, 8, and 7, who also had standing structures that measured fairly tall. How much time did you spend planning or building? Anyone from any of those groups? Yeah.
We spent about 70% of our time planning, and we were rushing at the end to try to build.
Wait, what's your number?
3.
3. Oh, I had you all as actually like building fairly early, but maybe it was relative to everyone else.
Yeah, I guess relative to everything else, we were kind of late because we actually found a couple of structures that did not work for us.
Oh, well, so you actually did test some out, though. That's why.
Yeah, we were testing some different theories out amongst 3 different theories that we had amongst each other.
So you didn't start building that one until later, but you did start kind of playing around.
Yeah, we adapted on the fly.
All right, yeah, good. That was going to be my next question. What about the other groups? Where's the 14? Wait, you were group 7. Group 7. When did you start building? Okay. Yeah, yep. And actually, you all were 3/4 of an inch away from being the winning team, and you are one of the first ones I noted that started building. Yeah. Okay, so for the winning team, did you evolve or adapt your structure as you went, or you kind of knew? Oh, yeah. Yes. Say a little bit more about that.
Well, we went in thinking of like a skyscraper type, cubes on top of cubes. And then we're like, oh, we're running out of tape. This is an issue. And
limited resources.
Yeah, and then I feel like, in this challenge, I feel like a lot of people just automatically go to the teepee. You got a lot of support at the base and nice top. And then the marshmallow really held it together.
Good. And the marshmallow was a heavy marshmallow.
Yeah, it was big.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so for the whole group, everyone, let's open it up. What worked well or what didn't work well for your group in terms of accomplishing this task? What worked well? Let's start with that, yeah.
I think overall, my group's work ethic together, we were very let's try this.
Yeah.
We were all doing all the ideas. I think, kind of a loud mouth, sorry. I think really that just generally what ended up being was that the marshmallow was too heavy and none of us really accounted for how heavy it was going to be.
Yeah.
But I think overall we worked really well with this idea and this idea and just putting all the things together. Yeah, it was very collective per se.
So it felt collective. You did end up with a standing result.
Oh, that's after the fact.
Oh no.
No, yeah, it was.
Okay. So you had a lot of the philosophy of collective leadership, but not necessarily a great outcome.
Yeah. If we had fettuccine noodles, I think it'd work better.
All right. I will keep that in mind, or smaller marshmallows. All right, other folks, what worked well for your group? What do you feel like facilitated the progress you did make? Yeah, in the back.
I feel like my group and I, we all communicated our ideas effectively to each other. Whenever we had an idea, we spoke about it. Our final result didn't really stand, but it was like an inch off the table, which is something. It was standing. So yeah.
Yeah, good. So you made some progress.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say there were a couple that I was really certain were going to be standing at the end and win. And it was a high, I think a couple of you took high risk with height. And it looked like they were going to be the winners, and then at the last minute, they weren't standing. But, you know, no risk, no reward. What else worked for folks? Yeah.
Even though our structure fell down, like right as we kind of were trying to put the marshmallow on top, I think what worked for our group is that everyone encouraged one of our teammates who had knowledge about architecture and engineering to voice her opinion. And even though she was kind of shy and didn't really want to at first, but everyone's like, no, we want to hear what you have to say. Please let us know what's going on, because we really have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
And I also think that everyone in the group kind of did something. We had somebody who was ripping off pieces of tape, or just even handing the tape, people helping to hold the spaghetti in place. Or and I think everyone kind of just took on a role and helped everyone else while we were encouraging each other.
Yeah, so this is interesting. You're the first person that's mentioned some roles sort of evolved. Did anyone else see that happen in their group? Show of hands. It's fine if not. I'm just curious. How did that come to be? How did those roles evolve?
Hello? Oh, I think everyone just wanted to help. So everyone, I feel in our team, just found something to do and just was like, okay, I don't know anything about building, but I'll rip tape, or I'll place the tape, or I'll hold the spaghetti because other people around have better ideas, and I just want to support them.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so it sounds like roles developed kind of organically as the process went along, and it sounds like some people kind of fell into the roles that were most natural given their natural talents, and other people, it sounds like in your group, look for gaps, like what needs to be done that I can help here, even though it may not be like where I'd naturally or first go. And I think it's an important rule of collective leadership is thinking about where are the gaps, what can I fill? Like what do I have the competency to fill, or what needs to be filled that no one else is doing where I can step up and do that. It's a great lesson. What didn't go well for folks? Like what strategies did you try either like as a group or interpersonally that just seemed like they didn't fly?
We actually had a full standing structure that was taller than all the ones around us, but then we got greedy and we wanted a little bit more and we didn't have enough resources left, so we tried for it and it didn't work out.
Oh my
so
God,
we should have just stuck with what we had that worked.
It's a good metaphor. Yeah, right? Like you had something that was going well, it was in the lead, and you stretch yourselves thin and then the whole thing collapsed. Yep. I mean, that happens in the real world as well. Did anyone, by the way, get ideas from other table groups? Did anyone kind of look around, see what others were doing? Nobody wants to raise their hand, but like I hear some nodding and giggling. Yep. Industrial espionage, right? Seeing what the other teams or other organizations are doing. I mean, you have to think personally about what level of that you feel comfortable with, but that absolutely does happen in the real world. It might feel unfair, just like it feels unfair that some people have more or less experience, but that is the context we're dealing with. So let's think about in terms of timeline. How did the tight timeline of only 18 minutes affect you? Did it like make you like rise to the occasion, or did it feel like you could have done better if you had more time? Yeah, I see like a frantic hand.
Hello. So our table was, I would say, very collaborative, and we had roles developed naturally. We had our kind of guidance person, and we knew what we wanted. We said that we didn't want the tallest structure. We wanted the most sustainable structure. But I think what worked against us was time.
Yeah.
So we ran out of time, but we still have a freestanding structure going here. So.
Oh, good. Well, so you kind of made progress.
To that too, we're at a table of all managers, directors, or supervisors.
Oh, good.
And so that was one of the challenges, I think, is that we all are used to kind of saying, hey, here's how it needs to be done. So when we're talking about collective leadership, it was just super fun to watch and kind of observe and be challenged myself into how much do you want your own voice to be heard in the planning and the timing and the actual doing, how much are you going to put your hands on? And that was one of the challenges, I think. Meredith was actually my mentor. And so we do a lot of things similarly. And so I found myself wanting to put my hands in and like do things similarly but differently. And so that worked against us as well a little bit, I think, for the timing issue. But it was really cool to see how everybody in the deciding of the roles was able to take a step back and say, if this is going to be sustainable and if we're going to have a finished product at the end, which we did have a finished product, it's just a little after the fact. But we all had to take a step back and recognize what the ultimate goal was and then achieve that goal by communicating effectively and aligning our values together. So that was really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm so glad you mentioned sort of the similar background there. So you might think, oh, this is like a fun, cool learning experience in terms of collective leadership. But this activity has actually been studied pretty broadly across the board with different groups. And interestingly, anyone have any idea the group that performs the least well on this? Yeah, it's executives. Executives and managers, and the reason why is exactly what you're saying. We're used to saying, okay, here's what needs to be done, like have at it. And so the other group, actually, I will say that does similarly poorly is MBA students. Similar, like, all right, I'm going to organize this, now someone will build it, and they're all saying that. Interestingly, though, they have found that if you add an administrative assistant to a group of executives or managers, they actually perform significantly better because the person in that role has this capability of sort of facilitating action. One of the groups that does the best on this, I think this is totally fascinating, is kindergartners. And the reason they do so well, there's a TED Talk on this, you can see some of the ones that kindergartners built, and you're just like, that's amazing. One of the reasons, the theory behind this, why they do so well, is because they don't spend too much time planning, which is why I asked, how much time did you spend planning? It sounds like actually for the group that did end up having the tallest, you were one of the rare occasions where that extra planning it was like a risk, but it did pay off. But usually it does not pay off to plan too much. What does pay off is what this group did, who also had a very tall structure, which is start building, it doesn't work, it kind of falls apart, but then start building again. You usually will get better results across the board. So it's an interesting leadership lesson, right? Like a lot of us, we want to make sure we have that right plan before we start building, but it can actually hinder us in the long run. All right, questions on that? Yeah.
So I noticed you made a point to say that a lot of your talking points are based in research and in science. So I was just wondering, so 18 minutes is not a multiple of 5. It's not 15 minutes, it's not 20. So is there something special about 18 minutes?
No. No, I just like 18 minutes. What I have found with 18 minutes, so if I give you much more time than that, it actually kind of ruins the activity because everyone starts optimizing, so I don't want it to be more than like 20 minutes. The reason I pick a number like 18, sometimes I'll do 19 or 17, is somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 I found is optimal for like getting good discussion like this, where not everyone is able to solve it, but some people do. 18 people remember and keep track of the time better. If I say 15 for some reason, if it's a multiple of 5, people don't track the time as well, and so that like adds like a layer of what would that be called? Like a confounding variable, I guess, in science terms we'd call it, where it kind of messes up where I'm like, I'm not sure if you're not getting that result, or if the results are different because of the timing or not. But I have found that anywhere from 15 to 20 is optimal. I just like 18. But that's a very, very good question. Yeah, other questions?
One is that structures that are too heavy at the top don't work.
Ah, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Such a metaphor.
And that the base at the bottom, a strong base is important for sustainability. So 2 kind of hidden messages in that.
I love that. I have a colleague, Steve Kagan, who's done this activity a number of times, and he always makes this sort of like meta comment. What's the metaphor for the structure? And I think you hit on it so well, like top heavy
is not always, and in fact usually isn't a good strategy, and how you have that supportive base matters a lot. Yeah. Any other final questions? Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, one of the groups that survived and succeeded on it with, it fell apart and they regrouped and kept going.
Yeah.
So that notion of grit and just pushing through. So have you noticed with this study that collective grit is a thing, where in collective leadership versus some people keep working and then you have part of the group that quits?
It's interesting. So I'm thinking about grit, and I'm also thinking about resilience and kind of the difference between those. Grit. So I should say I don't formally study this process. I just do it in the way that we're doing it now and observe lots of results over large groups of people. There are scientists who formally study this. I actually think that that's where 18 minutes comes from also. Like, I think that's just sort of the general amount, but I have done it in shorter or longer. I think grit is like passion and persistence for long-term goals. Persistence towards long-term goals that you're passionate about. I think there's like an element of passion there that makes me think maybe resilience is a better term. Sorry, like my science mind is like going through the literature being like, which word? I think there's a collective resilience, which is the ability to hit obstacles and just keep going and overcoming. They're very similar concepts, although if you ask the scientists who study those concepts, they would say they're very different. But I think they're similar. And yeah, I think groups have the capacity to build a collective resilience. How that happens or the mechanism for that, we could ask group 7, right? Like, what happened that made you as a group want to keep going? Did you feel like at certain points like you wanted to quit when it fell apart or you weren't going to win? Because I don't know, maybe there's like a very famous paper that's about to come out of this, yeah. Say it again? Group 3. Oh, sorry, group 3. Sorry, that's it, I keep doing that, I know. I keep saying, y'all were tied. I'll ask you both.
Well, one of the things that when we started off, it was like, we all had the same vision, but it was just a matter of the structure. So it kind of took us saying, okay, here's our resources, let me show you. Like, I know one of the things, like one of our group members said, draw it out. And then once we drew it out, we realized, okay, we have the same vision. Now, with the resources that we have, what can we do, to make sure that we have that solid foundation?
Actually, that does sound like grit. That sounds like you had a
Definitely
passion
grit.
for a common vision, right? And you encountered obstacles and had persistence. Okay, so what made it so that what was the factor that made all of you want to keep going?
Well, first we were like, okay, but it's time.
Like a little bit of a competitive.
Push. And but then also it was like, okay, at one point we were going to say, okay, we're going to abandon this. But then we had another group member that was like, no, we're going to follow this in through the end. So let's see what we have. Let's see what resources we have. And then we just kind of just saw it and we just build. Everybody just took a piece of the puzzle.
So a couple of big ideas that I think get to the question you asked, which I think is a really good and deep question. One is just this idea, if you can get everyone on board with that vision early on, then even if there are roadblocks or stumbling blocks, people feel so excited, they feel that energy, they'll keep going. And then even if you are the person who's in the assigned leader role, it makes your work a little easier. It's a little bit less work that you have to do because everyone's taken ownership of that vision. So I hear you saying that happened. I think also, though, it sounds like there was a particular person who was like a champion or cheerleader. And it gets back to, it's so funny, this concept has come up 4 times today, the incomplete leader, right? You don't have to be that champion or cheerleader, but you want to make sure someone on your team can do that so that when things get rough, people don't lose momentum. I guess there's also a third factor there, which is that there was a fast-paced kind of competitive spirit, and I think that built some energy for people that kept them going. Yeah. Final, yes, reflection. I want to ask you a question.
No, this was just maybe an observation. It seemed like in our group, in some ways, and I was just the tape guy. I was giving everyone tape. But it seemed like
excuse me.
Some people kind of fell into roles. And sometimes in groups there's like an extrovert.
Yeah.
And the loudest person their ideas take top, and it seemed like there were some people who were more of an extrovert, and those ideas kind of rose to the top, and the introverts were maybe a little more, okay, that sounds good, and they fell into a role.
Yeah.
And maybe weren't as engaged early on, but then as the process went along, everyone seemed to get, more engaged.
Yeah, and also as you have time together as a group, you start to function a little bit differently. Imagine if we'd done this first thing in the morning. it might have ended a little bit differently, but no, we started with an icebreaker, right, which got you all in that norm of interacting and participation, and then you had some conversations with this group throughout the day, so that if we end the day with it, it probably goes a little bit different than if we'd started the day with it. I think that's a really good point, and you can think about that in the spirit of good metaphors, what that looks like at a high level in a team situation where you're working with a team or organization for a long period of time. I think you hit on another point that I just really want to underscore around this like introversion, extroversion piece. So I've looked at a lot of the research on this, and people always ask, is it better to be one or the other? The answer is no. In terms of leadership, there's many highly effective introverted or extroverted leaders, and there are introverted and extroverted leaders who are really ineffective. So I would say that's not like a defining feature of whether you're effective. But I will say, as someone who has a little bit more of a natural preference for extroversion, which you may have noticed today, I think we need to be really mindful of those beginning stages where sometimes if we prefer extroversion, and it doesn't come from a selfish place, but we want to, like, that's how we process our thoughts, by talking them out. That literally is how we think out loud, but it can really shut other people down. So I think the most self-aware extroverts that I've seen and worked with are those that really have learned how to, I have a friend who calls it monitor mouth time, right? But just make sure that we're not domineering in a group and that we are using the power of our voice to actually lift others up and make sure other voices are heard. The other thing you'll note that I've done a couple times today is I've had like silent write time or have 30 seconds to think to yourself. And I would say if you're in a position where you're facilitating a group, that's a really good strategy, because some people, introverts especially, like need that kind of quiet process time before they can discuss. And if you don't give people that, then they don't have a lot to contribute because they haven't processed. I will also say, I think extroverts sometimes need it too, right? Like sometimes we need a minute to be like, wait, do I need to talk this out or should I think through this idea? So yeah, in addition to the length of time a group works together, I think that introversion, extroversion component in terms of making sure all voices are heard and everyone's included is a really important thing to be aware of. All right, I want to have a final reflection here on this. Yep. This is a private, right? So all of you should benefit from this, whether you prefer introversion or extroversion. I want you to spend 3 minutes thinking about what will you do differently now that you've gone through this collective leadership experience, the Marshmallow Challenge specifically, and what aspects of your personal leadership identity, the activity we did this morning, were reinforced, or what else did you learn? So 3 minutes, and we'll have a brief discussion and time for Q&A. All right. As a group, let's think through that last question. What did you learn about yourself from this experience? And you can focus on this afternoon, the collective leadership, the Marshmallow Challenge, or more broadly throughout the day. What have you learned about yourself? Okay, thank you. Right in front of me.
Something I learned about myself is that I'm always willing to like start everything off, but I always end up like falling back a little bit just to like see what everyone else will do. That's just something I always do when I'm in a group setting, is I'm always anxious to start, but I always let everyone else kind of do their own thing. Like towards the end of it, towards the middle of it, I'll let everyone.
Yeah, you can like incite it, kick it off, and then once you see it as momentum, you're happy to step back. That's a great leadership quality. Awesome. I'm glad you realized that. Yeah. And we will get to some other tables. I saw the hands, they were closed.
You know what I thought is that, there'd be times where I'd come up with ideas to use, but I think what I mostly was doing was I was trying to look for ways to improve or criticize ideas. To see, okay, how can we make this better, or would this idea work, or should we do something differently?
Yeah, absolutely. We live in a world that rewards good critical thinking skills, so we get in that mindset of evaluating other things, but a really key piece of being a good leader is being able to generate that initial vision on our own, even if it's imperfect, and not always being in the criticizer mode. So I love your self-awareness around that. Yeah, awesome.
I think he had the good idea. We should have listened a little bit.
That's awesome. Good. Well, it's meta learning. Yeah. I think also, sorry, I don't know if you want to chime in now or if this is relevant, but there was like a question at table 3, not 7, because I keep confusing you all, a while ago. I want to make sure we get to.
Maybe it's actually 2 things that I wanted to reflect. First, when we said that leaders should be listening actually to all their members.
Yeah.
And I told my friends here in my tables, when I was listening, when I was learning about what is it actually to listen, and I improved my listening when I joined a coach certifications
Oh,
to
yeah.
be a coach.
Oh, yes.
And it was one of my goals to improve my listening. And one of the things that I learned is that are you listening to reflect and right away to respond and preparing your mind to reflect and respond to whoever is talking, or is it you're listening to understand and be there for who is talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the second thing, when we were working on our project, when the time was going, we did not pay attention to the time.
Yeah.
Because we were actually, all of us, enjoying what we were doing. But when you were actually giving attention to the time, we were in rush to finish that project. We wanted to achieve and finish that project. Even though it wasn't the tallest, but we achieve it.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things that all of us, we celebrate our achievement. And each one of us actually was admiring each one of us for what we have accomplished. And I think this is more important for collective leadership.
Absolutely. You hit on so many good ideas. I won't reiterate them all, but I will focus on one thing that I think is key. There's this coaching skill of empathetic listening, and it is so, I think, undervalued in our society, right? We want people who have quick, good ideas, like right away, and we always want to be those people, and we're sort of conditioned to like talk more or listen to respond. There's a really good TED Talk. I use it in the programs I teach on emotional intelligence by a gentleman named Julian Treasure. And he has 2 TED Talks. This one, he has a framework called RASA, R-A-S-A, and it's a very easy 4-step framework for empathetic listening. It is the single most powerful tool I've seen people adopt to really improve their listening skills. I try to use it as well. My spouse always jokes, he's like, "Did you teach RASA today?" When I come home, I'm like, tell me more. So I think you're saying, but anyway, it's easy, it's quick to remember. I think it's like an 8-minute TED video. Highly recommend that. Thank you also for the reminder on that. Yeah, other reflections and learnings.
I thought it was really important to kind of come to, as it outlaid in the 3 leadership levels, to come to a group vision and kind of a group decision first.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we were kind of spread apart in what we were doing, the idea got lost of what we were doing.
Yeah.
And I think even if we failed together first, with our first idea, it would have been better if we would have come to a group decision first.
Yeah. I mean, it's trade-offs, right? Sometimes you're pressed for time. You got to say, here's where we're going, everyone on board, all right, let's go. But then what happens, the trade-off for that kind of leadership, which is more like level 1 leadership, is that not everyone is always as invested. So if you transition more to a level 3 type of leadership, right, where everyone has co-ownership, you often have higher investment, more empowerment, this gets back to the research we looked at this morning around long-term engagement, right? The trade-off to that is sometimes we just genuinely don't have the time to do that. It takes a lot of time, and then we don't get to the result that we need. Yeah. Other lessons or learnings, yeah.
What I learned is that our failure is probably more, we can learn more from our failure than if we were to succeed, because other teams who got the marshmallow to stay up, they're probably wow, nothing was wrong with our communication, nothing was wrong with our management, and so they're not going to reevaluate themselves. But us, we're as a team, we're okay, what was wrong with our management? What was wrong with our engineering skills, and what was wrong with our communication?
Yep. I love that you said that. There's a chapter 4 in the New Alpha book. There's a section in there on failure, embracing failure and continuous improvement. And I feel bad for people, I always say this, that are perfectionists, people who have never failed, because that must be so lonely and scary. Whereas those of us who've experienced, we're okay, cool, what can I learn from this? Let's keep going. And I really do think, this gets back to the point, it's about grit and resilience, but I really do think having that attitude where you are willing to take important risk and sometimes fail, sometimes you succeed though, but learn from those mistakes and move forward really builds resilience. Yeah, absolutely.
Since we start talking about the collective leadership, my friend here, Amanda, mentioned that a good leader, a good collective leader, is someone who will take the blame for the team.
Yeah, yes.
And share the praise.
Yes.
And then she added, if we all work together, we'll learn from the mistakes. All of us, we will gain more experience.
Yep.
Not only one person. So the collective leadership is really important when it comes to this part. Because, just to add one point, there's like some kind of a project I'm working on, and I've been doing all of the work, and I'm doing bad. I'm doing badly, right? But when I make the mistake and I want to correct it, I'm the only one who knows the information.
Yeah.
But my other team members, because they're not participating, so they're not gaining experience. So it's up to me again to correct the mistakes.
Yeah, and I think it could, I mean, one thing you could take on to challenge yourself to do is think about how can I bring them in more, right? Which is hard because you're like, come on, y'all, I'm motivated, aren't you? But sometimes that's the most effective leaders are those who are able to bring in people who otherwise like don't have a natural motivation, right? They're not getting like a paycheck for doing, maybe they are, in which case that's a whole different story. But oftentimes if it's like a group project, you're like, cool, I'm gonna sit back and coast. And if you're the one who's doing all the work, you're like, how can I bring you in? And I would say, like if I were your coach, I would challenge you to think about how can you bring in some of those people. Maybe not all of them, but how can you like take steps to bring them in as well? So you can create more equality there. Yeah, and great lessons also. Yeah. Final learning comment, and then we'll wrap up just because I do have a hard stop to catch a flight home. No pressure. Oh, yes.
I was going to say that I learned to be more confident through this activity because there was only 18 minutes, and so you have to realize, I noticed that, you know, some leaders, they have a problem with being confident in their ideas, and that can, they can miss out on some great opportunities that way. But with this time limit, you have to kind of go with your gut and say, okay, I thought about this idea, so let's go through with it. But had it been more time, then, you know, there would have probably been more people overthinking it, like, okay, this won't work, so I'm not going to do it. But with this, you know, with this activity, you know, you have to do what you think in order to get something.
Yeah. I think you hit on such a good point around this idea of intuition and what kind of role should intuition play in our decisions. And I think we do live in a world, certainly in a lot of MBA programs across the world that I've worked with, that we want to teach people not to rely too heavily on their gut, right? We want to look at data and be able to look at it very critically and figure out what the data say and make decisions based on that. That is a very good skill to have. I don't want to discount that, but I think your point illustrates that sometimes you also have a gut instinct and there's like a moment where you don't have time to look at the data. You just have to go forward and you have to have confidence in your abilities. I will say, I think people get better at using intuition over time as they gain more experience with different types of problems, right? Like earlier on in our lives and careers, we might not have as much intuition just because we haven't encountered as many problems or, to your point, as many failures, right, that we've learned from. But as we grow and evolve and experience failure and learn from those things, then our intuition gets really honed, and that we don't want to lose sight of that and just be data-driven, because sometimes there's like real gold in terms of the intuitive thinking. Yeah. So the final thing I will just say is, no, not that. Thank you. It has been a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all today. Such a fun group. One of the few groups that at this stage in pregnancy I would have flown across the country to hang out with and spend a half day with. I hope we can keep in touch. Some of you have my cards. I'm happy to share my card. Find me on social media. I actually, oddly have met the most interesting people from events like this. I just ran into someone on the plane here who was at an event like this 3 years ago, and we recognized and remembered each other. So it has been inspiring and fun. I hope we can keep in touch. I will say also, as people who are participants in this program today, I hope that, well, thinking back to when Corey and Matt and I were having initial discussions about what we were going to do for the day, again, there were so many things that we could have chose, and we really tried to pick content that was going to be useful for you, not only in the moment today, but also after you leave this experience, so that you have really actionable reflections and insights that you can use going forward, not only in your college career, but beyond, to not only be successful in your personal life, but hopefully be a force for good in the world, which we certainly need more of now. So thank you. I will hang out for a few minutes. I do have to leave in about 10 minutes to catch a flight, but if folks have questions, I would love to chat briefly. I'll kind of hang out up here if that's okay. Thank you all. It's been wonderful. Thank you. Ooh, one more thing, totally logistical. Some folks like the resources I share. I do share them monthly in a newsletter. It's not like paid or anything like that. I don't spam people. There is a newsletter sign up. If you're interested, in the middle of your table, you can just put your name and email. You don't have to. Again, if it feels like useful and you want to get monthly emails on this stuff, cool. If not, that's fine too. All right, that is all. Thank you.
Danielle, thank you so much. A couple things, folks, before we head off to lunch. First of all, what I'd like everyone to do, if you gain something from these activities today, if you are a better version of yourself, if you have some action items that you're going to take with you, could you please stand?
There's a lot of peer pressure in that question.
A lot of peer pressure. All the cool kids are doing it. So with that, can we once again give Danielle a round of applause? And while you're all standing as well, my team, since you're all standing, you probably won't be able to see them, but they're all in the back there. They've been amazing. There's Stukes, Johnny, okay, Corey, Mike, Johnny, our whole team. They've been absolutely amazing pulling this all together. Our teaching staff, everyone. This doesn't happen without them because they are the logistics people. I'm the big picture guy saying, hey, let's make this happen. And they actually do. So fantastic job to all of them. And a couple things when it comes to logistics, we love to give some swag to the folks that actually stayed throughout the entire event. So if you have inside your folder, if you have a sticker, correct, Corey? What color sticker? A yellow sticker inside your folder. After the session, after we start heading out for lunch, where do you want them to go, Corey? Right up front? Okay, right up front we have some swag. We have some UNF swag, TLI swag, all that good stuff. And then finally, when it comes to lunch, I know you're anxiously awaiting lunch. Lunch will be outside the doors to the left, down the hall, past the elevators. Sound good? All right, folks, thank you for a great day. Continue being leaders both on campus and in the community. Appreciate it.